Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cavoukian, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to you, even though it's remotely, on AI and ethics. There's so much going on in this area, and I developed AI ethics by design, so I'd love to tell you about it. And since it's an extension of privacy by design, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about privacy by design and privacy. I always start, when I have a captive audience, by dispelling some myths associated with privacy. Privacy is not about secrecy. It's not about having something to hide. It drives me crazy. That could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich. You know, it's just crazy, because it presumes that the state has a right of access to all of your information. As long as you're a law-abiding citizen, what's the problem with that? The problem is that's not what freedom is about. That's not what democracy is about. Privacy is actually about control, personal control relating to the uses of your personal information. You have to be free to choose who you decide to disclose your information to and how you would like to have it used. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination. Big term, simple concept. It should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And it was considered to be such an important value that they enshrined it as a right in their constitution in 1983. And context is key. That's why it's so important that the individual makes the decisions relating to his or her personal information, because only they know how sensitive the data is or completely lacking in sensitivity, and they're happy to disclose it. I always say privacy is not a religion. It's about choice. You want to give away your data? Be my guest, as long as you make that decision yourself. And I always like to remind people that privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. You cannot have prosperity, creativity, innovation without privacy. It's absolutely essential. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy, and that's why it's so important to contain. And if you value your privacy, you will value everything associated with it, because it forms the foundation of our freedom. I like to talk about privacy by design, and I call it the decade of privacy by design, because even though I created PBD a long time ago, late 90s, it really came to light in 2010. Once a year, privacy commissioners have an international conference, and it's usually in Europe, but in 2010 it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day conference, we're allowed to introduce resolutions, the commissioners are, at a half-day closed session. And I introduced a resolution in 2010 that privacy by design should complement regulatory compliance. And to my amazement, it was unanimously passed as a privacy standard, as an international standard. And I was surprised at first, because I didn't think people would be so supportive of a very different construct. It's more like a model of prevention, like a medical model of prevention. You want to prevent the harms from arising, not leave it to regulatory compliance after they've taken place. But when I started talking to the commissioners afterwards, I realized why they all supported it. Like me, they realized that in this day and age of ubiquitous computing, massive online connectivity, social media abounding, we were only seeing the tip of the iceberg as privacy commissioners. The privacy harms were abounding and remaining largely unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. And that was unacceptable to all the commissioners. And that's why we agreed that regulatory compliance alone, which is always after the fact, is unsustainable as the sole model for ensuring the future of privacy. We needed to get proactive and get ahead of the harms in an effort to prevent them from arising. And we've had great luck. It's been translated into, privacy by design has been translated into over 40 languages. And when I was commissioner, I was privacy commissioner of Ontario for 3 terms, a long time. Not a week would go by I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction telling me what they were doing in their respective areas. So very exciting. And I was going to say the 2 essentials, which I'll get to in a moment, of privacy by design are proactive, prevent the harm from arising by identifying the risks and addressing them, and getting rid of zero-sum dated games. Zero-sum means you can only have an increase in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a combination of zero. And I assure you, it's never privacy that wins over the other interests, nor should it be. But I sure as heck wasn't going to let it lose out all the time. Zero sum is an either or, one interest versus another, win-lose proposition. It's so dated. Get rid of this. Substitute positive sum. Positive sum just means you can have two positive gains in two areas at the same time. I call it the power of and, privacy and security, privacy and data utility, privacy and artificial intelligence. We'll get to that in a moment. And everyone I've talked to said, especially the tech people, data scientists, cryptographers, like Bruce Schneier, he said, look, it's a false dichotomy, and this privacy versus security thing, it's nonsense. You're talking about unnecessary trade-offs. We can do both as long as you get it to us up front when you're asking us to write the code. So I always tell people, get rid of the silos. Everyone talk to each other before you ask your tech group to write a program or code something. I want you to bake this into the data architecture of whatever is being produced. Bake it into the policies and procedures. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. I'm not going to review them all now. We're limited in terms of time. I've talked about it, preventing the harms by being proactive. I want to talk about privacy as the default setting. This is critical because what it means is instead of expecting the individual or consumer to search through all the legalese in the terms of reference and the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says do not use my information for any other purpose, we know nobody does that. I mean, life is short. Privacy as the default flips that on its head and it says we cannot use your information for any other purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection. Privacy is automatically built into what we're offering you. We can only use your information for the primary purpose. And if later on there's a secondary use that arises that we would like to use your information for, we'll go back to you and seek your positive consent. Win-win. I cannot tell you what the amazing strength of this. It builds such trusted business relationships. And companies who do this have told me when they have gone back to their customers to obtain additional consent later on, they always say yes, because there's a trust that has been developed there. What they don't want you sharing their information with third parties unknown, but within the company, they're golden. Just a word about, I've already talked about the importance of positive sum, not zero sum. I can't emphasize that enough. And you will gain a competitive advantage by doing that. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily cybersecurity attacks, if you don't have a strong foundation of security, you're not going to have any privacy, full stop. You have to have both. And visibility and transparency, you have to give people access to their own data. And you'll be doing yourself a favor by doing it because the only person who knows if there are mistakes in the data you've collected or corrections need to be made or it's no longer valid is the individual. So companies who do this have told me it's been great for them because it gives them much greater accuracy and control. It makes things work much better. Just in case you think, well, this is an interesting concept, but it can't work on the ground, au contraire. When I was a privacy commissioner, everything had to work on the ground, then and there. This is a compilation of 22 papers we did with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course. Sorry, I know I'm leaving out a number, but take a look. You'll see how definitely you can do privacy and all of these areas. And Japan was an early adopter of privacy by design, and they sent this to me just before my last term as commissioner ended. And I thought, if the Japanese can understand, insisting on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, then surely the rest of us in English-speaking countries can also grasp the meaning and the value of these terms. You're all familiar with the GDPR, I'm sure. You are all on top of this, which gives much greater control to individuals of their personal information. It's wonderful. It strengthens privacy and raises the bar dramatically. But to my excitement, they included privacy by design in the GDPR and privacy as the default. That is huge. And so I'm thrilled, and I'm now offering privacy by design certification in partnership with KPMG because companies come to me to be certified, and with their consent, I send KPMG into them to look under the hood, if you will, to do the audit, the assessment, that they are in fact following the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design. So if you have any interest in this, just send me an email and I'll tell you more. Now, I would not be so bold as to say this, but Information Age said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I assure you, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But in countries that don't have laws that are essentially equivalent to the GDPR, unfortunately, like Canada now, we always used to have essential equivalence, but I think we'll get it back when we upgrade our laws. But the US never has. Companies are wanting to get certified in privacy by design so they can show the GDPR they're acting in good faith in the absence of laws that comply with the GDPR. However, in Canada, as I said, our federal privacy commissioner went to the government last year and said, look, we need to strengthen our federal private sector legislation, PIPEDA. It's no longer adequate with the GDPR. We've always enjoyed adequacy, and we need to add privacy by design into the law since, after all, it was created by one of ours, and they have it in their law, and we don't have it. So this was a document that was produced by the federal government in response to the Privacy Commissioner's comments, and it's very promising. The title, as you can see, says Towards Privacy by Design. So I'm optimistic that later this year we're going to see an upgrade in our federal laws that will give us essential equivalence to the GDPR. And as I mentioned, we've been doing certifications now with KPMG. We've also aligned with ISO. As you know, it's a leading accreditation certification body, and you'll be seeing some movement on that shortly as well. It's called ISO Project Committee on Privacy by Design for Consumer Goods and Services, so stay tuned. Now let me talk about artificial intelligence for a moment, because there's been a lot of concern about what is the AI actually doing? Is it biased? Are we going to have tyranny of the algorithms? We don't know how it's engaged in the results it's giving us. Is there discrimination, etc.? Some people have called it unfairness by algorithm, and they feel that we have to address the harms of automated decision-making. A lot of people are concerned about discrimination, that we just don't know what's going on, and we have to understand it. We have to have a way of looking under the hood, so to speak, and actually understanding what are the algorithms doing, the training data sets that inform the AI algorithms. What are they examining? What is forming their substance? There's a global commission on internet governance that is now looking at algorithmic bias and discrimination. They're not necessarily neutral, of course, and so you're going to have increasing attention on this in the years to come. A lot of people are very concerned about the tyranny of the algorithms, that out of context, you just don't know the value of data or how it applies. So these are all of the areas of concern that are arising. And there is, of course, in conjunction with that, a call for algorithmic transparency, so we know what exactly it's doing. And you need to have trained people look at this. You or I, well, perhaps you, but I'm not trained in artificial intelligence and examining how the algorithms work. So we need to have trained, skilled people examining this for us. A lot of people are questioning the bias. Is there bias in AI? And are the training data sets being used, for black individuals instead of white or others, or etc.? Now, I want to tell you about a case we had last year at our Supreme Court in Canada, where this exact issue was addressed. An Indigenous gentleman, a Métis gentleman, was up for parole. He was in Correctional Services Canada, in prison. And at his parole hearing, they had used an algorithm to determine if he was likely to recidivate. And the algorithm told us, yes, he was a likely candidate for recidivism, so they denied him parole. And he said, no, the algorithm used training data sets that did not reflect Indigenous individuals like himself. So he said, this is unfair. It's not based on a population that is my population. So you can't make extrapolations about what I may or may not do because it's not based on my population. And the Supreme Court actually agreed with him. They said that, we've got to take all reasonable steps to ensure that any information about the offender that is used, it has to be accurate and up to date. And they said that the data, the training data set that was used to develop and train the algorithm, that the assumptions that were coded into it, in this particular case, created bias that led to inaccurate predictions about the individual's likelihood of recidivism. And so they said, no, we reject this, and they sent it back. So this is huge, I think, and it shows that in real life, algorithmic discrimination and bias is now actually being addressed in ways that influence individuals. So I started by telling you about privacy by design, and one of the reasons I did that is there was a comment that privacy by design is key to the future of artificial intelligence, that we have to apply it. And so they asked me to apply it if I could. So this is PBD 2.0, applied to artificial intelligence. I call it AI ethics by design. And you can see a lot of it is related to the need for transparency, accountability to deal with algorithmic bias. The ethical principles applied to the treatment of personal data in privacy by design and other areas must be applied. And we also have to have algorithmic oversight, because if you don't have that with individuals who have an ability to truly oversee these training data sets and algorithms, it's not going to work. Of course, fundamental respect for privacy as a human right, and data protection, personal control must be through privacy as the default. That was the second foundational principle of privacy by design. We have to lead with that. It has to be baked in automatically to the entire operation. We have to be proactive in order to do that, also identify the security risks to minimize the harm. And that's the essence of privacy by design. Address these issues proactively so then you can minimize the harms and the risks that may arise. And of course, we need very strong documentation to facilitate all of the ethical design and the data symmetry. So this is my AI ethics by design. Please take a look at them. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear about it, because we have to ensure fairness in AI and the applicability to our data. Just for your information, last year I started a new organization called the Global Privacy and Security. It's an international council for global privacy and security by design. Someone reached out to me in the international community and said, you've really got to spread this out. So I started this not-for-profit, and I have leading, amazing people as my founding members. Darren Entwistle, he's the CEO of TELUS, one of our major telcos. I'm sure you've all heard of Michael Chertoff, who was the second Secretary of Homeland Security in the US. Gilda Kerchov is the Director of EU Counterterrorism. Greg Wolfman, CEO of Security. I could go on and on. We just have had a wonderful response to this. And it's all about getting rid of the zero-sum mindset that you must have both privacy and security, privacy and AI. Always privacy and, not versus. And if you have any interest, I offer an online course on privacy by design, the framework that has gone global, which is why I'm offering it online. You can take a look if you have any interest. You can follow it online. Let me end, ladies and gentlemen, by just urging you to be proactive in all that you do. When you talk about ethics, you talk about AI, it is incumbent to know how the technology is operating. How are the algorithms functioning? How are they filled in terms of the data that comes from the training data sets? As you can see from the case in the Supreme Court of Canada, when you examine the training data sets, they can reveal bias, and that was the exact example in this case. So take a look at this. Please abandon zero-sum either-or thinking and embrace positive sum. We can do both. You can always have privacy and fill in the blanks. That's what we have to go to. And ethics is an essential component of privacy by design. Because it's done proactively, you can actually take the time to address all these issues, identify the risks, and then put in the measures needed to create privacy and data utility, functionality, business interests, artificial intelligence. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, let me mention one more thing. I don't know if any of you follow Twitter, but if you do, I offer from 5:30 to 6 a.m. every morning, I tweet out the latest privacy stories from all around the world. So if you have any interest, follow my tweets and you'll hear what's going on in a variety of jurisdictions all over the world. Thank you very much for your time.